The sun had no mercy that day. It scorched the horizon until even the shadows disappeared, and the sand beneath the boots burned like fire. In the heart of that brutal stretch of desert, a woman named May knelt beside a body barely clinging to life. A girl, no older than 12, her lips cracked, her skin like paper, her eyes glazed with the weight of death. There was no one else for miles. No help, no cavalry. Just May, her horse, and the last flask of water she'd been saving for herself. And in that moment, with the wind whispering tales of survival and silence, she tipped the bottle to the girl's mouth and gave it all. She didn't ask the girl's name. She didn't expect thanks. The West didn't work that way. You helped because it was right, not because it was easy. May lifted the girl into the saddle, walked beside the horse for 20 miles through the heat, and collapsed at the gates of the nearest outpost. By the time she awoke, the girl was gone, vanished without a trace. Some said she hadn't made it. Others believed she was just another ghost swallowed by the land. May never spoke of it again, but each morning after, she left a tin cup of water on the fence post outside her ranch, just in case. Years passed, and the memory dried up like an old well. May continued her quiet life, tending her land, keeping to herself, never asking for anything. Her neighbors barely remembered her name, and travelers passed without noticing the lone figure who still watched the desert like it might speak back someday. But then came the dust clouds, rising like thunder from the east. Horses, banners, men in armor stitched with sun-scorched cloth. And at the front, leading them like a storm carved from silence, was a woman with fire in her eyes and a familiar scar on her cheek. The townspeople panicked. They feared a raid, an invasion. But the army didn't break down gates or raise weapons. Instead, the woman dismounted, walked toward May's porch, and fell to one knee. 10 years ago, she said, voice steady but full of weight, "You saved me, and I have not forgotten." Behind her stood soldiers, orphans, outcasts, survivors she had gathered and led across the Badlands. And now they had returned, not to conquer, but to protect the land of the woman who gave water when no one else would. May said nothing for a long while. She only looked into the face of the girl she once carried through the sands. Then she reached for the tin cup, filled it once more, and handed it over with a tremble in her hand. The woman drank, not because she was thirsty, but because the past deserved to be honored. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, proof that in the cruelest places, the smallest acts can echo across lifetimes, and kindness, once given, never dies. May had always lived on the edge of things, on the edge of town, on the edge of company, on the edge of memory. Her days were filled with dust, worn tools, and the whisper of wind through dry grass. People didn't visit often. She wasn't unfriendly, just quiet, self-sufficient, the way many women of the West had learned to be. Her only companions were a chestnut mare named Whiskey and a battered rifle she hadn't fired in years. But even in her solitude, she never let go of one routine. Every dawn, she filled the tin cup and placed it on the fence post, looking toward the horizon like she was waiting on something she couldn't name. No one else remembered the girl. 10 years in the desert can erase a lot of stories. But May remembered everything. The limp body, the way the girl's fingers curled when the water touched her lips, the unbearable weight of carrying someone who might already be gone. She had risked her own life that day, not for glory, not out of duty, but because something deep in her soul had refused to let the child die alone. And though the girl had vanished without a word, May held on to the belief that somewhere, somehow, that small act of mercy had mattered. The years hardened May's hands, but never her heart. She worked the land through droughts and storms, bartered in town with quiet nods, and kept to herself when gossip filled the saloons. Some thought she was cold. Others thought she was broken. But no one knew the fire that burned steady inside her. It was the fire that kept the cup full. The fire that remembered a name never spoken and a face that had never left her dreams. May wasn't waiting for a thank you. She was waiting for proof that kindness still echoed, even in a world that so often forgot. Then one evening, long after the sun had disappeared and the crickets had begun their song, she heard something unusual, the distant thunder of hooves, not scattered like wild horses, but in rhythm, a formation, a force. She stepped onto the porch, squinting through the moonlight. From the eastern ridge, a mass of riders approached, kicking up dust that shimmered under the stars. May stood still, her rifle untouched, her hand steady. And as they drew closer, she saw it. A banner stitched with the symbol of a hand holding a drop of water. Her breath caught. Her heart began to race. Not in fear, but in recognition. At the front rode a woman cloaked in leather and linen, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. She dismounted in silence and approached May without a word, stopping just before the fence. There was a pause, a lifetime packed into a heartbeat. Then the woman knelt. "You saved me," she said. "I was dying, and you gave me water." Her voice cracked, but her eyes were fierce. "I have crossed deserts, mountains, and war to return. I come with no debt, but with an oath. My army is yours, should you ever need it." May didn't speak. She simply stepped forward, took the cup from the post, and handed it over. The woman drank slowly, reverently, as if the water itself held memory. Her name was Sarah, and her voice carried the weight of command, but her eyes still held the echo of that lost girl May had found a decade earlier. May didn't ask where she'd been. She didn't need to. Sarah spoke anyway, standing beneath the moon with her soldiers behind her like shadows. She told of waking up in the outpost infirmary alone, of fleeing into the hills when men came to collect her for reasons too dark to name, and of surviving by claw, by grit, and by the fire that had been lit in her that day on the sand. She spoke of others like her, children who had been forgotten, women who had been used and discarded, men who had lost their names and worth. Sarah gathered them, trained them, gave them something no one else had: dignity. They didn't follow her because of rank or blood. They followed her because she had saved them from the same desert that nearly killed her. "We were all dying," she said. "You gave me water. I gave them purpose." Her eyes shimmered. "And now we return, not as beggars, but as guardians." May listened in silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because her heart was full. She looked at the people behind Sarah, scarred, silent, and yet whole. Not broken remnants of the desert, but forged iron born from fire and suffering. She saw herself in them, saw her younger self, her mother, the women who buried their husbands and kept going, the boys who never made it back from cattle runs. The West had taken so much from so many, but here was something it hadn't taken: their will to rise. The townspeople gathered at the edge of the road, eyes wide, hands trembling. They whispered about invasions, about raiders with no flags. But when they saw Sarah kneel before May, and May lift her up like a mother greeting her grown child, something shifted. Fear dissolved into awe, and for the first time in years, those who had once dismissed May as the quiet widow at the edge of the dust began to understand the depth of what she had done, and who she had become because of it. That night, Sarah's people camped on May's land, not to conquer, not to claim, but to rest beside the woman whose one act had breathed life into their leader. They lit no fires, sang no songs. Only silence filled the valley, the kind that speaks louder than noise. And as May stood by her porch, watching stars shimmer overhead, she felt something shift inside her. Not pride, not victory, but peace. Because now she knew, kindness, once given, does not vanish. It returns, sometimes in whispers, sometimes leading an army. The next morning arrived quiet, but thick with meaning. May woke early, as she always did, expecting the same old silence. But outside her window, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: movement. Dozens of figures in disciplined formation, already tending to the land. Some were fixing the fence. Others were collecting water. No one waited to be told what to do. They just moved, instinctively, respectfully. It wasn't a performance. It was honor in action. May watched with a still heart and steady eyes. The desert had once tried to take Sarah. Now she had returned with people who didn't just survive. It was clear they lived with purpose. May stepped out onto the porch, and Sarah approached. "We won't stay long," she said. "This isn't our land. It's yours." May shook her head slowly, her voice firm yet warm. Land doesn't mean much unless it serves someone. And right now, it seems it's serving just fine. A smile cracked across Sarah's face, small but real. She hadn't smiled in years. And yet, standing there in front of the woman who gave her water when she was worth nothing to the world. She felt more human than she had in a long time. In town, word spread faster than a prairie fire. People who had ignored May for a decade now came knocking, some out of curiosity, some out of guilt, and a few out of fear. But May didn't gloat. She didn't remind them of how they used to look past her. Instead, she welcomed them like she always had, quiet, steady, and kind. The town's preacher came first, offering a donation of bread. Then the blacksmith brought nails and timber. One by one, neighbors arrived not to offer help, but to ask for forgiveness and to learn what May had known all along, that real power lies not in domination, but in compassion. Sarah didn't stay long in the town square. She had no desire to be a symbol. But before she left, she stood in the center, surrounded by those who had doubted her kind, and said, "This town let me disappear once. Let it never happen again." She wasn't angry. She was clear. Her army didn't raise their weapons. They raised tents to shelter orphans. They offered medicine to the sick. Their strength wasn't loud. It was steady, like May's had always been. The West had shaped them, scarred them, and now it would never forget them. That evening, May sat beside Sarah near the old fence where the tin cups still hung. The sun dipped low, throwing gold over the valley. May looked to the girl she once saved and said, "I gave you water, but you brought life back with you." Sarah reached out, took May's hand, and whispered, "You didn't just save me. You gave me the reason to become someone worth saving." And in that moment, time folded in on itself. 10 years gone in the blink of an eye, as two souls, once bound by desperation, now sat side by side in quiet triumph. Over the following days, the land bloomed in a way no season had ever managed. Not with wildflowers or rain, but with purpose. Sarah's people taught the townsfolk skills they'd never known. How to purify water, build homes from desert clay, grow roots in soil long thought barren. In return, the townsfolk offered stories, trade, and music. Where there had once been silence, now there was harmony. It wasn't a parade or a feast. It was something more sacred, a quiet acknowledgement that transformation had walked through their gates and stayed. May began keeping a journal for the first time in her life. She wrote not just about Sarah, but about the others, the quiet boy who fixed her roof without asking, the one-eyed woman who told bedtime stories to orphans like a preacher in a chapel, the teenager who gave her only coat to a child trembling in the cold. These weren't just soldiers. They were survivors who had turned their pain into protection. And May, once a forgotten widow on the edge of the desert, was now their anchor, their North Star. Sarah continued to lead, but always from the edge, never above. She refused a throne, avoided praise. "We walk beside," she'd say, "never ahead, never behind." She sat with farmers, rode with shepherds, listened more than she spoke. And through it all, May noticed how Sarah never let go of one small habit. Each night, before sleep, she would fill a tin cup with water and place it on the rail. Not as ritual, but as remembrance. A promise that no one thirsty for kindness would ever be turned away again. Then came the day the scouts returned from the east with news of a nearby settlement facing drought and bandits. Without hesitation, Sarah prepared her riders. The town tried to stop her. "Let the army handle it," they said. But Sarah knew better. "We don't wait for permission to do what's right," she replied. May handed her a satchel of bread, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. "Take this," she said, "in case someone out there is still waiting for water." They embraced, and no words were needed. The girl she had once saved now rode off to save others. As Sarah and her riders vanished beyond the ridge, May turned back toward her house. Older, slower, but no longer alone. Behind her stood neighbors, children, and strangers who had become something more. A community forged not by fear, but by the ripple of one decision made 10 years before. And on that dusty porch, a single cup of water still waited. Because May knew someone, somewhere, would need it again. The days that followed were unlike any May had ever known. The quiet widow's life, once marked by solitude and survival, blossomed into one of community and purpose. Her porch, which had stood empty for years, now welcomed travelers, children laughing, and neighbors who came bearing stories as well as supplies. The cup of water on the fence post was no longer a solitary act. It became a symbol of hope, a promise that in this unforgiving desert, no one would be left to thirst alone. May spent her mornings teaching others how to read the signs of the land, where to find hidden springs, how to coax crops from stubborn soil, and the sacred art of patience. The women who had once whispered about her behind closed doors now came openly, seeking guidance. Even the men, hardened by years of hardship, showed a new respect, recognizing the strength that comes not from guns or grit, but from compassion and resilience. May's quiet leadership was the kind that didn't command attention, but earned it. Sarah's return had brought more than just an army. It had brought a new way of living. Together, they built wells, constructed homes from adobe and stone, and planted groves that would feed generations. The army that followed Sarah's lead became protectors, not conquerors. They held no banners of war, but carried tools and seeds instead. And as the land healed, so did the people. Wounds of the past began to fade beneath the steady rhythm of life renewed by water and bread shared freely. But the desert was still a place of dangers, not just from the harsh elements, but from those who sought to claim what others had nurtured. Bandits and land grabbers tested the new community's resolve, pushing boundaries and threatening peace. Yet each time they came, May and Sarah stood united, not just with rifles, but with a force harder to break, a bond forged in trust and tempered by shared hardship. Their strength was a living lesson that sometimes the fiercest protection is born from the simplest acts of kindness. One evening, as the sun set behind distant mesas, May sat beside the fire surrounded by children and soldiers alike. She told them the story of a cup of water given in the desert, a gift that changed the fate of a dying girl, and through her, the destiny of an entire land. The fire flickered in their eyes, mirroring the hope in their hearts. May looked to the stars and whispered, "It is in giving, even when we have little, that we find our true strength." The children repeated the words, passing them into the night like a sacred promise. The seasons continued their endless cycle, but the story of May and Sarah grew into legend. One told not only in the town's dusty streets, but whispered around campfires miles away. Travelers spoke of a desert oasis where water was shared freely, where an army marched not for war, but to protect the vulnerable. And at the heart of it all was a woman who had given everything she had, her last drops of water, to a stranger who returned not just with gratitude, but with an army of hope. May found herself surrounded by a family not born of blood, but of choice. Sarah and her warriors became her children, the townsfolk her kin. Together, they rebuilt a community that had almost been swallowed by dust and despair. Their shared history was one of survival, yes, but more importantly, it was a story of redemption, a reminder that even in the harshest places, kindness can thrive and transform lives. The desert winds still howled, and the sun still burned relentless, but beneath the unforgiving sky, a new legacy had taken root. Wells ran deep, crops flourished, and laughter filled the once empty valleys. May's simple act of giving water had become the foundation for a future where no one would have to die thirsty or alone. It was proof that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power, and that mercy can be the fiercest weapon in a world that knows only hardship. And though May's hands grew weary and her steps slower with age, her spirit never dimmed. She taught the children to respect the land and each other, to understand that every drop of water, every crumb of bread, was a gift to be cherished and shared. She reminded them that the true strength of the West wasn't in guns or gold, but in the courage to give when it seemed there was nothing left to give. In the quiet moments, May would walk to the fence post and see the tin cup still hanging there, sometimes filled, sometimes empty, but always waiting for the next story, the next traveler, the next soul who needed saving. And she knew that the desert, with all its harshness, had become a place of miracles. Because one day, 10 years ago, she had chosen to give water to a dying girl, and that choice had returned to her as an army, strong, unyielding, and forever grateful. The years passed, and the story of the woman who gave water to a dying girl spread beyond the borders of their small town. Travelers from distant places came seeking the oasis of hope that had sprung up in the desert's heart. They heard of the army led by Sarah, the girl once saved, who protected the vulnerable, taught the forgotten, and rebuilt communities shattered by despair. May welcomed them all, her porch becoming a gathering place where stories mingled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the warmth of shared fires. Sarah, now a woman hardened by battle, yet softened by compassion, never forgot the lessons learned at May's side. Her leadership was not born of ambition, but of gratitude and responsibility. She trained her army not to conquer, but to defend, not to destroy, but to nurture. Under her command, they built wells in barren lands, established schools for orphans, and healed wounds both seen and unseen. And everywhere they went, they carried the legacy of a single act of kindness, the gift of water that once saved a life and, 10 years later, returned as salvation for many. May watched all this with quiet pride, though she never sought recognition. Her hands were no longer steady enough for heavy labor, and her voice had softened with age. But her spirit remained as resilient as the desert wildflowers that bloomed each spring. She spent her days teaching the children who now called her Grandma May, passing on wisdom wrapped in stories, reminding them that courage often starts with a simple choice: to give when you have little and to hope when hope seems lost. The town flourished, a beacon amid the endless sands, and its people were bound not by blood, but by shared trials and triumphs. May and Sarah's bond had become legend, an emblem of the West's harsh beauty and unyielding heart. And even as the desert winds whispered through the canyons, carrying tales of dust and drought, they also carried whispers of water shared, lives saved, and an army that fought not with cruelty, but with mercy. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky with fiery hues, May and Sarah sat side by side beneath the stars. 10 years ago, May said softly, "I only had enough water for one." Sarah smiled, squeezing her hand, and that one had enough strength for 1,000. In that moment, the desert seemed to breathe with them, alive with the promise that kindness, no matter how small, can change the course of history. But the West is never without its shadows. Threats loomed beyond the horizon, bandits who saw power in fear, rival factions hungry for control, and a drought that tested even the strongest hearts. Sarah's army was called upon again, not just to protect their own, but to bring aid where hope was fading fast. They rode out with steady determination, bearing water, food, and the quiet strength inherited from May's example. May remained behind, tending the home she had fought so hard to build. Yet she was never truly alone. The children she had nurtured, the soldiers she had inspired, and the community that had grown from a single act of compassion surrounded her with unwavering support. Her days were filled with laughter and tears, stories and silence, a rich tapestry woven from threads of resilience and love. When the army returned victorious, bringing relief and rebuilding shattered towns, they brought with them not just supplies but a message. The West could be tamed not by the gun, but by the heart. May's water, once a symbol of desperation, had become a wellspring of hope. The cup on her fence post was no longer a simple vessel. It was a testament to the power of mercy. In her final years, May was revered not just as a survivor, but as a matriarch of change, a living legend who had turned the desert's cruelty into kindness, and who taught a girl to become a leader capable of shifting the tides of war and peace alike. Her legacy was not written in stone or ink, but lived in every life touched, every well dug, every hand held when hope seemed lost. As May's story drew to a close, it became clear that the greatest battles are not fought with bullets, but with acts of grace. The desert may be harsh, but it is also forgiving, especially to those brave enough to give what little they have. And sometimes, that gift is enough to lead an army, to change a land, and to remind the world that compassion is the truest strength of all. The legacy of May and Sarah was no longer confined to the arid plains they called home. Word of their courage and compassion spread like wildfire, reaching distant towns and even crossing into the territories of those once wary of outsiders. People began to see the power in their story, a testament to how a single act of kindness could ripple outward, creating waves strong enough to reshape a region. Travelers and settlers alike sought out Hall's Haven, eager to witness the transformation born from water shared and lives changed. Sarah, though now a seasoned leader, never lost the humility of the girl May had rescued. She worked tirelessly to build bridges between communities, offering protection to the weak and counsel to the strong. Her army grew, not by force but by invitation, as families welcomed the promise of safety and the hope of renewal. Sarah understood that true leadership meant serving others and carrying their burdens alongside them, a lesson she'd learned from the woman who had given her water when death was near. May's home became a sanctuary for those displaced by drought and conflict. The fences once solitary now enclosed gardens, schools, and homes where laughter echoed and children played beneath the shade of newly planted trees. The cup of water remained on the fence post, filled each morning, a symbol that no one who thirsted would be turned away. It was a reminder of beginnings and continuance, of lives intertwined by compassion and courage. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of amber and rose, May and Sarah stood on the porch surveying the land. 10 years ago, May said softly, "We were both lost in that desert." Sarah nodded. "But you gave me water, and I brought an army." They shared a quiet smile, knowing that their journey was proof that even in the harshest of places, hope could take root and flourish. Their story, whispered by wind and sung by those who came after, became a beacon, a call to remember that every small act of kindness matters, and that sometimes, when the world seems dry and empty, one person's courage to give can lead not only to survival, but to an army of change. Years rolled forward, and May's steps grew slower, but her spirit remained unyielding. The community she helped nurture flourished, a testament to resilience and love born of hardship. Children she once tended became leaders, farmers, teachers, and healers, carrying the lessons of water and mercy into every corner of the West. The story of the woman who gave water to a dying girl, and the girl who returned leading an army, had become legend, a tale told and retold by those who believed in the power of kindness to transform even the harshest lands. May often sat quietly on her porch in the evenings, watching the stars emerge, each one a spark of hope in the vast desert sky. The tin cup hung faithfully on the fence post, weathered but sturdy, filled each dawn, waiting for the next traveler who might need it. She understood now that giving was not a one-time act, but a legacy passed from heart to heart, generation to generation. Sarah, now a respected leader and mother figure to many, continued her mission. She never forgot the day May saved her or the water that kept her alive. Her army had become more than soldiers. It was a family, bound not by blood, but by shared purpose and unbreakable bonds. Wherever they rode, they carried with them the message that mercy is strength, and that salvation often begins with a simple cup of water. As May's life drew to a close, the community gathered, not to mourn, but to celebrate. They shared stories of her courage, her kindness, and the unspoken love that had healed a desert of despair. In their hearts, she was more than a woman who gave water. She was the wellspring from which hope had flowed endlessly. And so, beneath the endless sky of the West, May's legacy lives on, a powerful reminder that even in the driest deserts, the smallest acts of compassion can lead to armies of change, and that kindness, once given, never truly runs dry. In a world where strength is often measured by might and power, the story of May and Sarah reminds us that true courage lies in compassion and selflessness. One small act, offering water to a dying girl in the vast, merciless desert, sparked a chain of events that changed not just one life, but an entire community. It's a testament to the enduring power of kindness, proving that even in the harshest environments, a simple gesture can grow into a force that shapes history. Throughout their journey, we see how generosity without expectation can ignite hope where there was none. May's unwavering spirit and Sarah's fierce leadership show us that family and strength are not always defined by blood or rank, but by the choices we make to stand for one another. Their legacy teaches us that every moment we choose to give, even when we have little, sows seeds that may blossom into something far greater than we ever imagined. As you watch this story unfold, consider your own life. How often do we overlook the chance to offer help because we think it won't make a difference? May's story challenges us to act, to open our hands and hearts, even when it seems the odds are against us. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can lead to the greatest change, not only in the lives of others, but within ourselves. So, take this story with you. Let it inspire you to be the water in someone's desert, the light in their darkness. Remember that your actions, no matter how small, hold the power to alter lives, build communities, and create legacies that endure beyond a lifetime. In the end, it is our compassion that truly defines us. If this story moved you, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel to discover more tales that uplift and inspire. Like the video if it touched your heart, and share your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice matters, and your story could be the next one to change a life. Together, let's keep the spirit of kindness alive.